Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney says a proposal for a new oil pipeline in Canada is highly likely.
Look, the bottom line is a new east-west coast pipeline in Canada is good for Canadians. It's good for world markets in that we have access to more supply.
But for the first time, Canadian liquefied natural gas is heading overseas.
In the wake of escalating trade tensions with the United States, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is charting a bold course forward, pushing for new energy infrastructure that could shift the balance of power in North America's energy and trade landscape. The proposal for a new oil pipeline stretching from Alberta's oil sands to the Pacific coast marks a significant step in Canada's effort to reduce its reliance on the U.S. for oil exports. With U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs on Canadian goods ramping up, Ottawa is responding with a strategic maneuver designed to diversify its energy trade routes and, more importantly, increase its leverage on the global stage. For the first time in history, Canadian liquefied natural gas, LNG, is heading directly to Asia, bypassing U.S. shores entirely. The shipment of LNG from British Columbia to North Asia signals a seismic shift in Canada's energy strategy, driven by the need for trade diversification in the face of U.S. tariffs. The $40 billion LNG Canada project, which has the capacity to ship 14 million tons of LNG annually, is just one piece of this growing energy puzzle. As Canada's largest private investment project, it positions the country to become a key player in the global natural gas market, competing head-to-head with traditional exporters like the United States. The growing role of LNG exports underscores Canada's ambition to become an energy superpower. While nearly 97% of Canada's oil and gas exports have traditionally been directed to the U.S., the country is now taking concrete steps to enter the global market. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and China are rapidly increasing their demand for clean energy sources like natural gas, and Canada's geographic advantage, its Pacific coastline, enables it to deliver LNG to Asia in half the time it takes for U.S. shipments. This shift could have profound implications for the U.S.-Canada energy trade, potentially reducing Canada's dependence on American buyers and, more critically, shifting the power dynamic in trade negotiations. At the same time, the construction of a new east-west pipeline promises to further diversify Canada's energy exports. By bypassing U.S. refineries entirely, the pipeline would enable Canada to transport oil directly to Pacific ports, where it can be shipped to global markets. This project is not only an economic boon for Canada but also a strategic move to mitigate the long-standing vulnerability of being too reliant on U.S. buyers. If Canada's energy exports continue to diversify, it could significantly alter the trade balance between the two nations. While these developments signal Canada's intention to break free from U.S. dependency, they also mark a shift in how energy politics will be handled in the future. As Trump continues to wield tariffs as a political weapon, Canada is using its energy infrastructure as a form of leverage, demonstrating that it no longer has to accept U.S. terms. The future of North American energy trade may look very different if Canada's energy exports continue to expand, offering a counterpunch to any future U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. As the U.S. president moves to intensify his tariff strategy, the relationship between the U.S. and Canada is evolving in unexpected ways. Trump's tariffs, once viewed as a method to pressure foreign adversaries, have now expanded to include key allies, including Canada. The 35% tariffs on Canadian imports, announced with little warning and a hard deadline, are not just economic tools, they are instruments of leverage in a broader geopolitical game. But rather than simply retaliating, Canada is playing a more strategic, measured game, working quietly behind the scenes to protect its interests, while avoiding the inflammatory rhetoric that often accompanies these kinds of conflicts. For Canada, the threat of escalating tariffs could have severe consequences. The unpredictability created by such tariffs complicates long-term planning for businesses that rely on stable trade relationships. While Canada is a major supplier of key materials like steel, aluminum, and copper, these sectors are feeling the strain from increasing tariffs. For example, Trump's imposition of a 50% tariff on copper imports in a surprise move signals a shift away from targeted protectionism to broader economic reshaping. The fallout from this tariff will impact industries on both sides of the border. The ripple effect will be felt across sectors reliant on copper, from electric grids to data centers, and across industries such as automotive and telecommunications that depend on its availability. However, while the U.S. uses these tariffs as political tools, Canada is adopting a more deliberate strategy. Instead of rushing into retaliatory measures, Prime Minister Carney's government has focused on diversifying its economy and trade relationships. The recent shipment of LNG to Asia and the ongoing construction of the East-West pipeline are clear signals that Canada is shifting its focus to new markets, reducing its vulnerability to U.S. actions. This change, while not an immediate remedy to the tariff crisis, is a long-term play designed to fortify Canada's economic position in the face of growing U.S. pressure. Canada's more calculated response has drawn mixed reactions domestically. While the Conservative Party criticizes Carney for not taking a firmer stance against Trump's actions, many within the business community view the measured approach as a necessary pivot in a rapidly changing global trade environment. Canada's path is not one of defiance but rather resilience, emphasizing that the country's ability to thrive on the world stage is no longer tied exclusively to its relationship with the U.S. By focusing on diversification, particularly in the energy sector, Canada is making clear that it has options beyond the U.S. market. With global demand for LNG growing and with Canada's ability to reach Asia more efficiently than the U.S., the country is positioning itself to become a major player in the global energy landscape. This strategy also serves as leverage in trade negotiations, signaling to the U.S. that Canada is no longer reliant on American demand for energy and that it can redirect its exports to more favorable markets. Yet, while Canada is diversifying its energy exports, the uncertainty surrounding Trump's tariffs still looms large. For Canadian businesses, the question is not just whether they can navigate the rising costs associated with tariffs, but whether they can plan for an environment where tariffs are imposed unpredictably without warning or negotiation. This is the true instability of the Trump administration's trade policy, the inability to predict what's coming next. The threat of tariffs hangs over every Canadian industry, leaving businesses to wonder if the next round of sanctions will target them. In this climate, Canada's approach to trade and diplomacy is characterized by quiet persistence rather than explosive confrontation. Prime Minister Carney has emphasized that the government will continue to support Canadian businesses and workers, but it will do so through measured, strategic actions rather than through political theatrics. This stance is designed to maintain stability and prevent further escalation. Whether or not this strategy will succeed remains to be seen, but in the face of U.S. unpredictability, Canada's long-term approach to diversification and energy exports offers a glimpse of a future in which it is no longer beholden to U.S. whims. As the trade standoff between the U.S. and Canada reaches a critical juncture, the stakes are higher than ever. Trump's threats of tariffs have moved beyond economic policy tools to become a form of political maneuvering aimed at securing leverage in broader international negotiations. His administration's erratic approach to tariffs, hitting even close allies like Canada, has created a sense of instability that makes business planning increasingly difficult. In response, Canada has been strategically strengthening its position, particularly in the energy sector, where it stands to gain more independence from the U.S. The long-term implications of this trade conflict are still unfolding, but one thing is clear. Canada's response is not just about counteracting tariffs, but about repositioning itself as a global energy power. By building infrastructure to ship liquefied natural gas, LNG, directly to Asia and fast-tracking the East-West pipeline, Canada is effectively reshaping the energy landscape of North America. This move, far from being a mere reaction to Trump's tariffs, is a proactive strategy to diversify its energy markets and reduce its dependency on the U.S. What makes this strategy so powerful is its timing. While Trump's tariffs were meant to corner Canada economically, they may have inadvertently pushed the country to make decisive moves toward independence. With global energy demand on the rise, especially in Asia, Canada is seizing the opportunity to tap into these emerging markets. By doing so, it not only counters the economic pressure from the U.S., but also strengthens its position in future trade negotiations. Canada's ability to redirect its energy exports away from the U.S. gives it a bargaining chip that could potentially undermine the effectiveness of Trump's tariff tactics. However, it's not just about energy. The broader picture involves a recalibration of the U.S.-Canada relationship in which tariffs are no longer the only form of leverage. Canada's strategy of trade diversification, coupled with its growing energy influence, is shifting the power dynamics. The U.S. might still be the world's largest oil producer, but it faces significant challenges in delivering that oil to international markets. This is where Canada has a distinct advantage. With its newly constructed LNG terminals and proposed pipeline infrastructure, Canada is positioning itself as a more reliable, flexible energy supplier to the world. Yet the risks of this strategy are not without their challenges. While Canada has made significant strides in diversifying its energy export routes, it is still deeply tied to the U.S. economy, especially in sectors like agriculture and manufacturing. The ongoing threat of tariffs creates an environment of uncertainty that could deter investment and disrupt supply chains. Canada's response to Trump's tariffs, while strategic, also highlights the vulnerability of global supply chains in a world where trade relations are increasingly governed by the whims of one leader. The question now is not whether Trump will escalate the trade war, he already has, but how the U.S. will respond to Canada's growing independence. Will the U.S. recognize the shifting dynamics and come to the table with more favorable terms, or will it continue to escalate the conflict, further straining an already fragile relationship? One thing is certain: energy is now at the heart of this trade battle, and whoever controls the flow of energy in North America will have the upper hand in future negotiations. In the meantime, Prime Minister Carney's strategy remains focused on resilience. While the threat of tariffs continues to loom large, Canada is positioning itself for a future where it is no longer held hostage by U.S. trade policies. By quietly building infrastructure, diversifying its trade relationships, and strengthening its energy position, Canada is preparing for a new era of North American trade, one where it is no longer reliant on the U.S. as its sole economic partner. If successful, this strategy could ultimately